Hello and welcome back to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed text of Magic the Gathering's history. In this video, we're going to start looking at something very special, which was the Mirage block precons that were released exclusively on Magic the Gathering Online. So before we actually start looking at the decks, I need to just set a little bit of background. Like I said, these decks were only made for Magic the Gathering Online. They weren't actual physical decks because Mirage block was before they had the whole concept of kind of pre-made decks. The first precons we ever had were in Tempest, which was why I started this whole series looking at Tempest, because those were the very first ones. And yeah, it was just kind of like a fun thing that they did. So it was about 10 years after Mirage Block actually came out. It wasn't exactly 10, which was actually the weird thing. It wasn't like a 10-year anniversary or something. It was like 9.5 years or something. So I don't know why they just didn't wait 10 years and be like, oh, look, now we're going to add Mirage card pool to like Magic the Gathering Online, and to celebrate that, we're going to do precons. Like, no, it was just like kind of very random, like, oh, by the way, Mirage is now on Magic the Gathering Online, and it's nearly been 10 years. So it was a very weird decision. But what they did, they made 4 precons for each of the sets, so Mirage, Visions, and Weatherlight. And yeah, and then release them so people could get them on Magic the Gathering Online and play with them out of the box, so to speak, out of the digital box, and yeah, and then use them as basis to adapt and make their own decks as you normally would with a precon at the time, I suppose. So yeah, that's kind of like the background of how these decks came to exist. Obviously, they're they're still pretty obscure, I think, in terms of Magic the Gathering's history and stuff, because it's like out of all the whole range of precons, it's like 12 of them, and only on Magic the Gathering Online, and for super old sets. So yeah, there we go. Kind of a little interesting origin story, I think. But anyway, let's go on and start looking at them. So there's 12 of these, so we're going to smash through these, I think, and just have a really good time talking about like some older cards, because these are going to be some of the oldest cards I've talked about in this series. I thought Tempest was going to be the oldest, but obviously Mirage is the whole block before, so we've got like a whole new like card pool to explore, and it's going to be interesting for me because this is before I was really playing the game. I got into the game mostly in Tempest era, so I say like Mirage is completely new to me, basically, to sort of really explore it and look at those cards. Anyway, enough of the rambling, enough of the preamble. Let's get into it, and we're going to start off by looking at Burning Sky, which is a blue and red deck. Also, got to apologise for the image of the deck box here. This was genuinely the best quality image I could find, and that's going to be for basically all of these Mirage block deck images. Obviously, because they weren't real boxes or anything. It was obviously just digital art that was mocked up and something. But really hard to find good quality images for them. So really sorry, but it's going to look like rubbish anyway. Let's dive in, start looking at Burning Sky. So we've got 24 creatures, we've got 8 instants, 4 sorceries, and 24 land, and we've got a mana curve off to the side there. So let's dive in, start looking at it. So it's basically like a blue-red skies deck, which is kind of interesting. It's not something we've really had before, really. In this entire series, I would say mostly we've had like blue-red like spells matter, I suppose. But yeah, so it's really interesting to see like an older set use this kind of strategy that we've not sort of like seen before. Anyway, so we get into it. So one of the resin deck is Mist Dragon. So it's 4 and double blue for a 4/4, and I love this is just how it was written at the time, because these weren't updated with like new word or anything. They were like on Magic the Gathering Online. They were just used kind of as they were originally printed. They weren't, I say, updated with wording or anything. So Mist Dragon has 0 flying, 0 loses flying, and 3 in W phases out. So very minimal approach to rules text. Obviously, these days we would expect to say, like it loses flying permanently, it loses flying, this effect lasts permanently, that kind of thing. And 3 in W, Mist Dragon phases out. We'd say stuff like that. So yeah, it was definitely during like a phase of Magic where they were sort of like doing this very like minimalist rules text, I suppose, or like they, I guess, just guess like, oh, they know that when we write this ability, they'll just know it applies just to this card and not any other card. But yeah, that's why we have slightly more, expansive rule text, I suppose, so there's no confusion over it. So it's really interesting. This has like this effect to like lose flying. There are, I suppose, very niche corner cases where like losing flying could be a benefit. Like, I know to dodge, I suppose at the time it would have been like to dodge like Hurricane or something, or some other maybe like burn spell that like affects flyers or something like that, I suppose. But yeah, it's just an interesting kind of ability to have. But it's, the main thing of it has the phases out ability. So phasing is pretty huge through all of like this block really. It's mostly in blue, and phasing, is a ability we've seen come back in recent years, mostly in commander sets. Phasing just basically means it's treated as if it doesn't exist until I think it's the start of your next turn. That's what it is. So it's not like it leaves play or anything. It's just we leave it in play, and we just sort of like all pretend it's not there. That's basically the best way of describing it. So so this can use that. It can phase out to avoid burn spells, avoid removal, that kind of thing, and also, because this was a time when combat damage used the stack, I suppose this was also a possibility that it could sweep in. It could do 4 damage to something it was blocking or blocked by, and then phase out, still have the 4 damage, and like not die to the damage that was on it. So that could have been a potential strategy. So then we've got 2 Azimate Drakes, 2 and a blue for a 1/3 flyer. It has, again, this minimalist rule text: 1 blue +1/+0 turn. You cannot spend more than 1 blue in this way each turn. So it's basically just a very roundabout way of just having a 2/3, isn't it? I think I normally just prefer normal Wind Drake over this, honestly, because this doesn't require a mana investment to go up to 2 power. But like, it's okay. Like, choices were really limited at the time, and that's going to be, I feel, something I'm going to say through all these Mirage block reviews, of just like, it was all right at the time. We've got 3 Bay Falcons, 1 in the blue for a 1/1 flying with vigilance. Gives me a really nice nostalgic vibe to Zephyr Falcon, which was a card I used to love back in the day, playing on the Microprose, like the Chandelar game, Zephyr Falcon, which is basically this exact creature, but obviously a different name. But yeah, this is, I think, fine for like kind of a little small little early game flyer. Then we've got 3 Teferi's Drake, so 2 in the blue for a 3/2 with flying and phasing. Now, phasing is slightly different than phases out, in the fact that you have no control over it. So, the way phasing works is basically you just get to use this every other turn you have it. So, from what I understand, it would be you pay 2 in the blue, you play this, and then next turn, so let's say turn 4, it phases out, so it doesn't exist. And then turn 5, it phases back in, and then you can use it. So, so a lot of creatures have phasing essentially as a drawback. For maybe being like kind of undercosted in terms of like stats or whatever, because at the time a 3/2 flyer for 3 is crazy, so we've got to stick a drawback on it. So I don't know how useful this would have been, because like by the time you've played it and by the time you then get to use it, because outside of giving it haste, a 3/2 flyer is probably not that impressive anymore, I suppose. So that's going to be a bit of a theme going forward. We got a Vaporous Djinn, so 2 in double blue for a 3/4 flyer. During your upkeep, pay double blue or it phases out. Kind of exactly the same as Teferi's Drake. So this is kind of like classic of some blue creatures at the time. Like requiring like a upkeep cost to kind of keep it around, or there's going to be some sort of downside to it. And then we've got Dreamfighter, 2 in the blue for 1/1. Whenever it blocks or is blocked by a creature, both Dreamfighter and that creature phase out. So this is kind of interesting. The downside is like it will phase out, and then like your opponent, it will phase back in your opponent's next turn. So really, nothing much has changed for them, and then you obviously won't get Dreamfighter back until your next turn. So it's kind of a weird ability. I'm not really sure how much use it is actually providing. And then a single Harmattan Efreet, 2 and double blue for a 2/2 flying. You can spend 1 double blue to give target creature flying until end turn. Kind of expensive as an ability, but it's still it's still better than nothing, I suppose. And at least it doesn't rely on phasing or anything. It's not messing around with that. So this is okay, I think. We've got a Sukatwa Firewalker, 1 and double blue for a 0/1. Cannot be the target of red spells or effects. You can spend 1 blue. Not spend 1 blue too. You can tap it, and it does 1 damage to target creature or player. So this is the phase of the game's history where ping abilities are very firmly in blue for some insane reason, but they just are. And this was, I think, basically better than Prodigal Sorcerer. So it's like slightly extra color investment, and it didn't have any power, but you weren't using Prodigal Sorcerer to attack with anyway. You were always using it for its ping ability. and this has got its ping ability plus the essentially like hexproof from red. So which is, I think pretty good. So yeah, I think this is a nice little inclusion here. Then we've got 3 Pyric Salamanders, 1 in a red for a 1/1, and spend 1 red to give it +1/+0 to end turn. But if you do, it gets buried at end of turns. So not sacrificed, buried. And buried is just destroy without regenerate. And yeah, again, kind of weird that it's sacrifice and not this effect. So I talked about this a lot when I was looking at the anthology set, where I think Nevinyrral's disc, where like it's weird, it's not like a sacrifice effect or something. So if you did find a way of making it indestructible, you can just quite happily pump away to your heart's content. But yeah, this is okay. I mean, it's a small creature with a fire breathing ability. At least it's not really overcosted for having the fire breathing ability, like a lot of creatures at the time were. And then I believe this is the other rare, Subterranean Spirit. So 3 in double red. Of course, this is a time when the set symbols aren't coloured to denote rarity. So I'm fairly certain this is the other rare. So Subterranean Spirit is 3 in double red for 3/3 with protection from red, and has tap, does 1 damage to each creature without flying. So obviously you've got a lot of creatures with flying, so this normally doesn't hurt your guys. You do have obviously some smaller creatures on the ground which don't have flying, but this is fine. It essentially does like a little small tremor effect every turn, if you want to do that. It's okay. It clears out like small tokens and stuff. I suppose it's okay. Doesn't hurt itself with its effect. Yeah, it's alright, I suppose. Then we've got 2 Flame Elementals, 2 in double red for a 3/2, and you pay 1 red to tap and sacrifice, does damage equal to its power to target creature. This is okay, I think, actually, at 4 mana for a 3/2. And then being able to pop this ability to do 3 burn damage to a creature, I think that's actually okay. 2 Talrim Minotaur, this also I think is okay. This is actually like fairly efficient for the time. 2 in double red for a 3/3 with haste, and that's just very straightforward, like no horrible drawback. I think it's actually, in terms of red creatures at the time, I think it's actually pretty okay. And then we got a Burning Palm Efreet, 2 in double red for a 2/2. 1 in double red does 2 damage to target creature with flying, and it loses flying till end turn. So this is actually quite nice. You obviously got a lot of flyers in the deck, so you knew this to burn enemy creatures with flying, and if it doesn't kill them, it then gets them out of the way so they can't block your flyers, which I think is actually a pretty cute ability. I actually quite like this ability in red. It's a very unique way of dealing with flyers that like you essentially ground them for a turn, which is I think quite interesting. Because there are a few red cards that do it. Obviously, this one. I think there's Goblin's Sky Cutter, which is like from Time Spiral block. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but like it's just an interesting ability, and it'd be nice to kind of like, I don't know, maybe like see it more often. Maybe I think it's just kind of interesting. Then we've got 2 Wildfire Emissary, 3 in a red for a 2/4 with Pro White. You can spend 1 in a red to give it +1/+0 to end turn. I seem to recall this being like pretty good at the time, like reading in Inquest or something at the time that this was like quite highly regarded as a red creature at the time. I think maybe because it was just fairly efficient for its cost. It had useful protection, it had fire breathing, and didn't have any downsides, which feels like such a low bar to hit. But like at the time, I think this again would have been pretty okay. I certainly like it. Right, and then we've got a bunch of non-creature spells. So we've got 2 Boomerangs, double blue to return a permanent to his hand. It can get lands if you feel so inclined to do that. Just really solid, straightforward bounce spell. And then we've got a single Dissipate, 1 and double blue, you counter target spell, and then it gets exiled, which is nice. Really nice, this actually keeps cropping up in like actual modern sets as well. It does get reprinted occasionally. I think the last time we saw it was in the most recent Innistrad set, like the Midnight Hunt or Crimson Vow, one of those. Pretty sure it got reprinted there. But yeah, it's nice that it's still around and being relevant, I suppose. And then 2 medals, 1 in the blue. Target spell which targets a single creature, targets another creature of your choice instead. The new target must be legal. So just redirect a spell, which is always a useful effect to have, I think. And then we've got 2 Dream Cache, 2 in a blue. Draw 3 cards, choose 2 cards from your hand, and put both either on the top or the bottom of your library. So it is not card draw because you are spending a card and you're returning 2 cards to draw 3. So it's not card draw, it's card selection, but it's still okay. Like at 3 mana, I think, like to shuffle things around a bit. At the very least, you can put them back on top. It's obviously not as good as Brainstorm, but like so few things are. Right, and they've got Power Sync with really wacky Mirage era wording. So X and a blue, counter spell unless that spell's caster pays an additional X. And then this is such the weird wording. That player draws and pays all mana from lands and mana pool until X is paid. He or she may also draw and pay mana from other sources if desired. Which is it's such weird wording. So basically the way Power Sync works is you counter spell unless they pay X, and like basically if they don't pay X. They just like tap everything. I think they've got that can produce mana. I think that's actually what the the updated proper wording is. But yeah, it's just really a weird way of writing it here. It's very wacky. And then, by the way, completely out of nowhere, a single mystical tutor, so single blue. Set your library for an instant interrupt mana source or sorcery card because we're old school, so we have interrupts and mana sources still. And reveal that card to all players. Shuffle your library and put the revealed card back on top of it. So we'll just have so Mirage has like this whole cycle of like 1 mana tutors who are obviously like incredibly good, because it's a tutor effect for a single mana. And yes, it's like limited what kind of card type you get, but it's also instant speed. And it doesn't go into hand, it goes on top of deck. But I say it's instant speed, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, really crazy that it included this. And I'm fairly certain one of the other decks has one of the other tutors in it. We will see as we continue this journey of discovery for these old decks. Yeah, absolutely wild to include this. I think really fun inclusion. I suppose that would have been a incentive for people to spend money to get them online, I suppose. And then a single incinerate. So 1 red does 3 damage to a creature or player. Creature damaged by incinerate this way cannot regenerate this turn. So we just saw still during the period of Magic where regenerate matters a lot. So we saw a lot of effects that care about switching off regeneration because it's sort of in all colors sometimes. It's even if it doesn't return for regeneration, it's a really fine burn spell. A single Goblin Scouts, 3 and double red. Put 3 Goblin Scout tokens into play. They are 1/1 red creatures with Mountain Walk that counters goblins. So yeah, old wording to make tokens work, I suppose. So what? 5 mana for 3 1/1 Mountain Walk creatures. Yeah, all right, I suppose. Obviously, depends what you're playing against. I think it's okay. And then Carevex Torch, which has a very funky, unique sort of wording here. So X and a red does X damage to target creature or player, so it's Blaze, but interrupts that target Carevex Torch costs an additional 2 to play. So it's essentially, it can't be countered. It can be countered, but you just have to pay 2 for it. So this is kind of like a spell with Ward 2, which is I think really interesting. I can't think of any other spell that does this, that makes that is not full on can't be countered, but just makes counter spells or any other spell that targets it while it's on the stack more expensive. I think it's just notable for having that extra really kind of weird unique ability. I can't think of another card that does something like that, but if you can think of one, stick one in the comment below and we'll have a little cheeky chat about that. But yeah, it's a big X spell, so it's still fine. And then 12 Islands and 12 Mountains. So let's talk about what could have been. So yeah, it's kind of like blue red sky, isn't it? And obviously with the standard bounce and burn kind of thing that blue red usually does. I think it's okay. There's I think you could have maybe done without some of the other cards that have phasing, because the Dream Fighter maybe they're not amazing. So potential other cards like Wave Elementals. So this turn double for 2/3. You can pay blue, tap and sacrifice to tap up to 3 type creatures without flying, which is okay because then your stuff on the ground can get through, I suppose. Torrent of Lava is just a fun burn spell. X and double red does X damage to each creature without flying, which is obviously benefits your guys because you're a lot of flyers. And each creature gains tap, prevent 1 damage to this creature from Torrent of Lava, which is, again, Mirage Block is a real cornucopia of very weird little rules text and stuff. That it does X damage to everything, which is really good actually. It's essentially an earthquake effect. But yeah, also then to give creatures a chance to tap to prevent some of the damage from it, which is really crazy. And then Frenetic Efreet is an option here as well. So 1 blue and a red for 2/1 flying. You can pay 0 and flip a coin. Target opponent calls heads or tails. If the flip ends up in your favor, Frenetic Efreet phases out and dodges removal or whatever, or combat damage. Otherwise, gets buried. Again, it's not sacrifice; it is just buried. So if it was indestructible, it's basically all upside, I suppose. But yeah, we're talking about mixing indestructible, which is far far in the future with these older effects. But yeah, it's weird it wasn't just sacrifice and why it chose to be bury instead. Anyway, doesn't matter, I suppose. But yeah, and also the way this is worded as well is like you can infinitely stack this trigger as well, because it's flipping the coin is not part of the cost. Flipping the coin is part of the actual activation. It's not like 0 flip a coin, it's 0 flip a coin, if that makes sense. But yeah, just again a weird little card from Mirage era. Anyway, so yeah, that was Burning Sky. I think it was basically all right. I think because it's such a weird card pool to draw from, like Mirage era. Still feels like kind of like the Wild West of Magic the Gathering set design, where there's no, there's no like draft archetypes or anything like that. It is kind of just like, here are some cards we just designed at random, and what's here I think felt like it goes together pretty well, I think. So I'd love to hear what people's thoughts and opinions on this one are. So definitely stick a comment down below if you got any thoughts about this one. I would love to hear if you actually played any of these decks back in the day. Like if you played Magic the Gathering Online back in 2005 and these Mirage decks came out and you gave them a go. Like I would love to hear from you if you did actually play these cards. So definitely stick a comment below. But I'll be back next time, go look at another one of these Mirage MTGO precons. But until then, thanks for watching and listening, and have a great day.